Hey there, everyone. Let's continue. This time we're talking about forms. Now, at some point in your career, you're going to have to be asked, or you're going to be have to do some forms, whether it's a registration form, a login form, or a form, any form. Okay, so let's go ahead and start a form, and I'll show you what how to create a form and what the functionality in HTML is. And the forms, as you will see, is only part of the what's the word for it? It's only part of the process. The other part is the scripting side, which I will show you in another video on another series. You can use, PHP or something like that. Anyway, let's go ahead and start a file over here, and I'm going to call this forms.html right there. So again, I'm just gonna really quickly put out this template over here. Okay, now to create a form in HTML, there's a tag called oddly enough, form. And that's essentially how you mark a form in HTML. Anything that you put in between these tags is considered part of the form. Now, form essentially requires three things in its base form. I mean, there's always, pun not intended. Forms basically require three things. The first thing is it requires an attribute called action. Action basically is where you intend to send this the information inside this form when you submit it. Where is it going to go? This is usually a server script of some sort. Like, for example, I want to send it to some file called process dot. Let's say it's a PHP file. Obviously, we're not covering PHP in this series, but if you want to know more about that, message me, and I think I'll do another series on that. Okay, anyway, so the first one is action. Where do you want to send the information in this form to? I mean, if it's inside a folder called server scripts, for example, and there's a file in there, that's where you want to send it. Then that's where you want to put this action. Action is just the URL location for where you want to send this information to, yeah? Now, the second thing is, now this one is not really required, because even if you don't specify it, the browser will default to something, and that's method over here. Now, method, you have essentially two different types of what's the word for it? Types of sending the information in this form. You can either get or post. Actually, there are 8 ways, but we won't get into that right now. And the default is get. Now, what does this mean? Get basically means whatever information you put inside the form, it will be appended to the URL. In fact, let me just show you get, and then you'll see what this means in just a moment. And that's it. Oh wait, sorry, I said 3 things, right? Now, a form won't do anything until you actually submit it. So the third thing that's required is actually a way to submit the form. Now, there are a few ways. The most used one is basically to use an input. A tag called input. Now, input is basically a single, an empty tag, as you can see, and it basically just requires one attribute called type submit. There you go. Okay, now just by doing that, congratulations, you've just created your form. And if we take a look at it, I'm gonna open up where's my forms? There you go. And as you can see, that's your form. Tiki, there's nothing there, it just has a button with the word submit. Yeah, that's basically what a form is. When I click on it, it will basically send it to submit it to that action that I specified just now. So watch this, I'm going to submit it. Obviously, I don't have that file, so we'll get an error over here. It says there, the file was not found. But as you can see from the URL up here, it tried to send it to this server scripts folder, and inside there it was looking for process.php. Obviously, there's no such folder and there's no such file, so therefore the error. Okay, so that's essentially what a form is. Now let's get into, oops, sorry, excuse me, wrong one. Now let's get into the actual form itself. Now, the first most basic thing you can do is essentially have a text box for people to type information into. So let's start with that. I'm going to say input. Now, if I don't specify anything for the input, I just leave it like that, what the browser will do is it will default to a text type input, which is a text box. And this is what happens. Notice I just put input. And here's what you get. Ta-da! A text box, which you can type information into, just like that. Okay. Now this input over here, if you want to be more specific, you can just say type equals text. Although, like I said, even if you don't do this, it will already default to a text box. So you just learned that input can have many types. If you say type is submit, it'll give you a submit button. If you say type equals text, it'll give you a text box. Oops, sorry, I didn't save it, did I? Yeah, so this is a text box. Okay. And if I say type equals, let's say for example, range or something like that, and range basically gives you this, a slider bar. So you get a range from something to something. So these are just some just different types of input. So let's go ahead and start with the basic one, which is input type text over here. Now inputs usually there are a few things that you want to have. Like for example, if you want to make sure you specify what the placeholder for it, because this is something new in HTML5. There's an attribute called placeholder, and the placeholder allows you to give instructions to your user like this. Please enter something. So if I save this, this is what placeholder does. As you can see, it's now inside the tag, but the moment I click on it and I type something in, hello, notice the placeholder disappears. So the placeholder is just there to give your users instructions on what to do. It's a lot more, well, let's say a lot more efficient than you know, putting a label in it. Okay, so what else can you do over here? Now I can also specify that this is required. So I can say that this is required, and the value for this is either, you can say required equals, this is going to look weird, but you can say required equals required. On some mobile devices, attributes must happen in a key value pair. So if you have an attribute that has a key, you have to give it a value. Now the values, you can either say equals required, or some browsers will even say you can even put let's say for example true or yes, but the safest one is required equals, oops, sorry, excuse me, required, just like that. Okay. And all browsers will essentially allow this, or rather it will accept this. Okay, so let's save it. Now what does this required do? If you mark something as required and it's part of the form, watch what happens when I try to, I'm going to refresh that. Now if I don't enter anything over here and I click on submit, ta-da, as you can see, it will not allow me to submit the form. Not until I put something in there. Only when I put something in there does it actually submit. Ta-da! Okay. Now the next thing is forms are basically any input within a form should also have a name. Okay. Now this is it'll differ from server script to server script, but the most generally accepted thing is all forms have all inputs within the form should have a name. This is to identify where this information is coming from. So if I say, let's call this a user, or we'll call it u input. This is just a word that we just came up with, a name. You can just call it, you know, whatever you want, monkey, donkey, whatever. I'm just going to call this u input. No, it's not some special keyword over here. It's our own name that we're giving it. Now watch what happens when you submit the form. I'm going to refresh this, and blah, that's what I'm going to submit. Now keep your eye on the address bar up here. Watch what happens when I submit it. See that? See, basically when the moment I try to submit it, there's a question mark over there, and after the question mark you'll see this key value pair. There's the name and there's the value that was submitted. This is what you call the get method. Remember I told you that the get method basically appends the information from the form to the URL, and you can see it right there. Okay, so that's what the name does. So if you have like a whole bunch of inputs, like let's say for example a registration form, you have an input for name, an input for email, an input for a whole bunch of other stuff. And what happens is the server script that's going to be processing this form, well, it needs to know which part of the form is this coming from, right? So that's why we need names. Okay, now another thing, in fact, you know what, it's getting a bit long, so I'm going to place it down here so it's easier to read. That way we don't have to keep scrolling left. Okay, yes, you can write it this way as well. So it's still the same thing. I'm just making it easier to read because you can scroll up and down a lot easier than it is to scroll left and right. Okay, now another thing that you can have is if you want to make sure that the information is validated, you can also use another attribute called pattern. Now pattern basically uses something called regular expressions. I'll have another video on this later on, I mean, if you want to find out about how to write regular expressions. But let's say, for example, I want to essentially make sure that people enter let's say for example, I only want digits to be in here. So I can say I want digits at least 1, or basically let's make it a bit more specific so it's, you know, it's not something random. So I'm going to say at least a minimum of 3 digits. Okay, a minimum of 3 digits. So it means 3 or more digits are perfectly legal. So yes, if this looks like a little bit of gobbledygook, don't worry. I will be putting out another video on how to write regular expressions. But this is what happens. So I'm going to refresh that now. Now, if I enter anything, even though it's required, now I've just fulfilled the required requirement. I'm going to submit the form. And as you can see, it does not match the requested format because I said minimum of 3 digits. So even if I put 2 digits, that's still not going to work. I need at least 3 digits or more before it allows me to submit it. Okay, and that's what a regular expression does. It actually allows you to validate the form before it allows the user to carry on. Okay, another thing that you want to specify, or you might want to specify, is basically a title. Now what this does is it does 2 things. When you say when you specify the title, it becomes a tooltip for that input box. Okay, so for example, I can say title equals minimum of 3 digits. This is just to give your user a visual cue as to what you're looking for. Okay, so if I say a minimum of 3 digits, I'm going to save that, refresh it. Now watch what happens when I move my mouse over the text box. It becomes a tooltip. Okay, as you can see, minimum of 3 digits. And if I try to submit it, I'm just going to put just 1 digit right there. I'm going to submit it, and as you can see, it did not match the requested format. The title also becomes part of the error message, so the user knows, oh, okay, you're looking for 3 digits, and there you go. So that's essentially how that title starts off. Okay, so you now know some basic inputs or some basic attributes that you can use for most inputs, right? Now, what other types of inputs are there? You've seen text, which is the most common one. I'm going to show you another one that is also very useful, especially if you're doing like registration forms where you ask for people's passwords, or even a login form. There's another one called input type, and we'll say password. Yes, there's actually a input type password over here, and I'm going to give it a name of let's say for example pass. Okay, now this is what password does, and you know what, let's put a BR over here, a line break, so we make it nice and neat. Okay, I'm going to refresh that, and there's your password right there. And watch what happens when you type anything into the password. Ta-da! It basically will mask it so that people can't see what you're typing in. My secret or something like that. And what happens if I submit it is, oh, let me just put something there. Yeah, there you go. I'm going to submit that, and ta-da! As you can see, the pass equals my secret. And there you go. Okay. So that's what input type password is. There's a whole bunch. There's input type text, password, email, telephone. Remember that W3 Schools website I told you about? You might want to refer to that for the other types of inputs that you have. But let's show you a few others. Another one is the select. Now, a select basically gives you a drop down menu, if you will. Okay. Now, select basically, I'm going to give it a name. Let's say select is, well, I don't know, gender, and we'll say option over here, and option. Basically, I can basically give a value for this option over here. This is for, let's say, male, not make, male. Okay, and the value I want to display is male with a uppercase M. So the value is male with a lowercase m. Yeah, so I'll make that distinction right there. So Control C, Control V, and this is for female. Okay, and there you go. And I'll put another option there. There's a third gender, Tiki. Hey, we're in Malaysia. We're just right next door to Thailand. And yes, this is actually something that we have over here. So she-male right there. And there you go. This is what a select box looks like. It's a drop-down menu. So whichever one you select, like for example, I would like to select female. There you go. I'm just going to put something over there and something over there. And I'm going to submit it. Ta-da! As you can see, the value that was... excuse me. Excuse me again. Ooh, hello. How did that happen? Okay. I just messed that up, didn't I? Let's go back and try that again. Okay. I'm going to submit that. Ta-da! As you can see right there, gender equals female. Notice the value that was submitted is the lowercase one, which is the value that we specified in the options. Right there. Okay. Now, if I want to specify that one particular value when the form first loads on the page, I want some value to be pre-selected. Okay. I just say selected, and then I can say equals selected. Now, if you're just doing development for just desktop browsers or basically the regular browsers, you can just get away with just saying selected, and that will be fine as well. But like I said, there are certain mobile devices that actually take exception to this. So I usually just, it doesn't take much effort. Just put in selected equals selected, and that will solve all your problems. Okay, so take a look, and this is what I get now. Notice when I reload the form, the one that's pre-selected is she-male. Okay, so that's like your default selection. Okay, now you might be asking, well, Tiki, that's great and all, but how do I get something that's a little bit more, if I want to put in a large amount of text? Okay, well, we don't use selected then. What we're going to do is, I'm going to put a line break right there, and I'm going to say text area. Okay, so text area. Now, text area gives you a much larger space. And I'm going to put a line break over there. Save it. And let's take a look. This is what a text area does. A text area basically gives you a lot more space to write a lot more information. There you go. And text areas basically have a few attributes of their own. Like, for example, you can actually have a text area and you can specify how many columns you would like to have. Okay, now columns gives you a whole bunch of basically it's how many characters width would you like to have. Let's say I want to have a 50 column width, so 50 characters basically, and this is what happens. So if you say 50 characters, There you go. 50 characters width will be given to you. Now let's say I want a little bit more, on the rows. I want to, right now it's only giving you roughly about 3 to 5 rows if I'm not mistaken. And this changes from browser to browser, yeah? So you might want to check it with other browsers like IE or Firefox or another one of those browsers. So I want to say, let's say 10 rows. So what happens is you have 10 rows. So that's how you adjust the text area. Another very common type of input for forms is essentially the input type equals checkbox. Okay, now a checkbox is essentially, just like its name suggests, it's a checkbox right there. Okay, so a checkbox is for putting down a true or false. If you have something that is, you want to get a true or false value returned, that's how you do it. Okay, so and if you submit a checkbox, let's go ahead and give this a name over here. We'll call it a Boolean. So you can see what happens to this Boolean over here. Let's go ahead and submit it and see what value we get. Okay, so I'm going to refresh that, and I'm just going to enter some numbers up here, at least 3. I'm going to submit this, and there you go, Boolean on. Now if I didn't select it, I submit it, I don't get anything. So you can actually see it's either on or nothing. Now if you want to specify a specific value to send instead of just on, you can say value over here, and we'll say the value is checked or something like that, or checked by user, I'll just say. Okay, so now if I submit it, watch this. So if I'm just going to put some numbers up here, submit it, watch this, and I'm going to submit, ta-da, checked by user. So you can actually specify, instead of just on, it will basically send checked by user. Okay, what other types of inputs are there, the most common ones? Obviously there are so many others, and I will tell you more about those as we go along through the course. Another one is, let me just, you know what, for this one I'm just going to put a horizontal line over there, and in fact I'm going to put 2 horizontal lines, and I'm going to put it in between those lines. Okay, why? Because I want to show you a little bit of a separation. This is about radio buttons. So I'm going to say input, and this time I'm going to say the type is radio. Now, so I'm just going to say this radio button is for, let's say me. I'm going to put another input button right there. So this is how we usually write a radio button, and you, there you go. So I have 2 selections over there, and this is what it looks like. These are the radio buttons. It's either me or you. So as you can see, the radio button is just that. It's just that's the radio button. The words after that are just text that you specify after the radio button. Okay, just as a label to the user. So now here's the thing, radio buttons, I want to select it either, it's either this or this. I don't want to be able to select both, but here's the problem right now. If you just specify a radio button like that, you can select both. That's because the browser doesn't know that these 2 buttons are supposed to be in the same group. So what you need to do is you need to give it a name. Again, very important. And we'll call this the radio button who. Now here for the other radio button, we need to give it the same name. So here we say who as well. Just by doing that, now the browser knows, oh, these 2 radio buttons are actually from the same group. So by doing that now, watch this, I'm going to refresh this. Now if I click on me, it'll be me. When I click on you, me disappears, it's now you. And that's how you use a radio button. But what value is submitted? Well, that's because we haven't done that yet. So therefore you need a value over here, me, and a value U. And there you go. That's how you specify the values, the value for a radio button over there. So when you submit it, I'm going to refresh that. Watch this. I'm going to submit U, and I'm going to try to submit this. Oh, hello. I forgot to put in a value there. There you go. And let's go ahead and submit it. Ta-da! There you go. The value that's submitted with the form. Okay, so that's essentially how you use a form. Now, this is in its basic, again, pun not intended, but this is in its basic form. There are other functionalities which I will show you in the coming videos. But for now, you should know that forms basically are anything that you mark inside a form tag, that's your form. And all forms require three basic things, like for example, an action, a method, and a way to submit it. Okay, you've just learned that the get method basically appends the information from the form to the URL. Tiki, you mentioned something else just now that I saw just now, a post. Well, if you say method equals post, what happens is all the information inside the form, instead of appending it to the URL, will be appended to the header of the form itself. This is unseen by the user, it's transparent. It's actually part of the background information that gets submitted with the form. Now, if that sounded like Greek, don't worry, we will get into more details when we get into server scripts. Yeah? Okay. You also now know that form elements, there are many different types of inputs that allow you to do different things. And forms allow you to have different attributes, like you just learned about placeholders, and placeholders give a way to label forms with form elements. Like for example, like for this password, if I say placeholder over here, and it works for all different types, yeah? So if I say placeholder over here, and this is for password right there, what happens is, ta-da, as you can see, that's what a placeholder does. So you've seen what placeholder does, you've seen what required does, you've seen what pattern does, you've seen title. So these are just pieces of information that you can specify for the form. Okay, so with that, we'll finish off here, and we'll continue with oh, regular expressions. I gotta explain that, so I'll actually put an extra video for that. Okay, see you in the next video.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, please subscribe. Also, check out the links below. And if you'd like me to cover something else, please leave a comment down below.